Which one of these is correct? Der Mann hat einen Freund, or der Mann hat einer Freund, or maybe der Mann hat einen Freund. Well, if you're learning the German language, then it can be really difficult trying to decide which article we're meant to be using. Is it ein, einer, einer, die, der, das, dem, des, or any of those other many forms? Or maybe you've heard of all of those confusing cases, the nominative, the accusative, the dative, or the genitive. But maybe you aren't really sure what they're for. Well, stick around, because today we are going to learn what cases are, why we use them, and what they tell us about the nouns and the pronouns in a German sentence. And at the end, I've got a bit of a bonus summary of all of the uses of all of the cases, so stick around for that. Grüß Gott, hallo, ich bin Billy Badger und das ist Bausteine 2. Herzlich willkommen. Before we get started, let me say that there's a lot more to understanding cases than just learning a whole stack of tables that list out all of the different articles, personal pronouns, possessive adjectives, and relative pronouns. And that's not what we're going to be doing today. But just in case that's what you're here for, here are some fancy tables for you to look at. And if you're interested, you can download them for free from the links below, or check them out in our textbooks, Bausteine 1 and Bausteine 2, at the links in the description. But honestly, there's no point us trying to make sense of any of this if we don't understand how a sentence works and what the cases are actually for. So what are they for? Well, first of all, we need to know that cases are really just categories. Each one of them has a specific job, but of course they can do a few other things too. And in that way, they're a bit like these three things, aren't they? Each of them has a fairly specific function. This one chops stuff up, this one's good for scooping stuff up, and this one, well, you get the idea. And because they all look a bit different, we kind of know just by looking at them what we're meant to be doing with them. And with cases, it's exactly the same. Each case has a specific job, a specific thing or number of things that it's designed to do. And if we can learn to recognize them, then it tells us what the function is of any particular noun in a sentence. If you see the words dem, Löffel in a sentence, you'll know it's not the subject, as long as you know what you're looking for. To explain the German cases, I want to start off by looking at 4 pretty random English nouns. Of course, this by itself is not much of a sentence. There's no verb or anything else much really. But just by looking at these words, we can start trying to find some kind of link between them, trying to piece together some kind of story, how they relate to each other. But it's easier if we have a verb, one that lets us know what's actually going on, what's happening. So let's use this one. But before we can use it, we need to make a decision. We need to decide who is going to carry out the action that the verb describes. Who's going to do the playing? Well, let's be predictable and decide that the person is doing the playing. So now we need to use an article and make some changes to the verb. And by doing this, it means that we have already decided that the person is going to be the subject of the sentence. If we want to think about it in terms of the German cases, then this would be the nominative, because it's the case or the category that we use for the subjects of sentences. The case says that a person, a place, or a thing is doing whatever the verb says it's doing. So this means we now have the person plays. Now, that's an okay sentence all by itself, I guess. I'm pretty happy with that. But we need to work out how the other nouns fit in. We've got a couple more after all. We can think about what the person is playing, for example. And of course, a couple of things are possible here. The person plays ball, the person plays tennis. But if we wanted to use the word dog in the same way, it doesn't quite work. But it would work if we added in a preposition like this one. The person plays with the dog. Let's compare the two sentences. In the first one, our two nouns are connected directly by the verb, nothing else in between. So in grammatical terms, the ball, or tennis for that matter, is what would be called the direct object. And it doesn't really matter too much what the verb is. It would still mostly be the direct object in English or in German. The person plays ball, the person buys the ball, the person catches the ball. You get the idea. In each case, the ball is the direct object because it's what the person is playing, buying, or catching. So this is one of the things that the accusative case can be used for. But let's look at the other sentence. Here you can see that the two nouns are connected by a preposition, the little word with. So the person is not playing the dog, which doesn't really make too much sense. The person is playing with the dog. Here, we don't have a direct object. Instead, we have a prepositional object. Now, whereas the direct objects fall into the category of the accusative case, it's not quite so straightforward with prepositional objects because there are different sorts of prepositional objects. The object that follows could be in either the accusative, the dative, or the genitive. But in this case, our object is in the dative, and if you hang around until the end of the video, I'll tell you why. But for now, it's going to be enough for us to recognize that there is a difference between a direct object and a prepositional object. If we want to keep going and add our other words into the sentence, we soon recognize we need some more elements to make them fit. Let's see what we can come up with. The person plays tennis with the dog's ball. That's not too bad. Or the dog plays with the person's tennis ball. Here we'll see that I've connected two nouns, not with a preposition this time, but with an apostrophe, which indicates that one thing belongs to another. It's either the dog's ball or the person's ball. In German, as in English, this is a possessive form and would be in the genitive. At this stage, I want to ask the question, what's the point of all of this? Well, just like it's pretty easy to tell which one of these three things is the knife, the fork, or the spoon, the German language contains hints or clues in various places to let you know what the German nouns in a sentence are doing, what their job or what their function is, whether they are subjects, direct objects, or what kind of prepositional object they are. And they do this in two different ways. Firstly, by using some kind of article in front of the nouns themselves, or by changing the pronouns, if we're using words like he, she, or it to represent the nouns, much as we do in English. So if we see der Ball or den Ball, or maybe die Person or der Person, then as well as hinting at the gender of the nouns, there's also some information here that tells us whether the ball or the person is the subject of the sentence, the direct object, or something else entirely. Here's a bit of a summary. As we've said, the nominative case is pretty much dedicated to the subjects of our sentences. These help us to think about who's doing what the verb says they're doing, and we can recognize them because we use these articles or these pronouns. The accusative case has a few different jobs too. It's mostly used for helping us to identify direct objects, but also to draw our attention to some prepositional objects. But it's also used for a lot of places we go to or destinations of things we're moving around. And we can recognize the accusative case because we use these articles and these pronouns. The dative case does pretty much everything else. It's really handy. We can use them to indicate recipients of something, since the indirect objects of sentences are always in the dative. We can also use it for the objects of some useful verbs, like these ones, but we can also use them for some prepositional objects. We can also use the dative to indicate location, or with some adjectives to convey personal perspectives. And we'll recognize these functions because we'll be using these articles or these pronouns. Well, this just leaves us with the genitive, which we covered in a recent video, and if you missed it, you can watch it up here somewhere. The genitive really only has two jobs. Firstly, it indicates possession, that one thing is another's. And secondly, it indicates the objects of some prepositions, often the same ones in English that contain the word of, like instead of, because of, in spite of, and so on. It can be recognized because we'll be using these articles. So those are our cases. They narrow down the various functions of nouns and pronouns in a sentence to two main things: subjects and objects. They then tell us what sort of objects we're using. To help us understand what the function of the nouns are in the sentence, the articles or pronouns undergo subtle changes, which can be a little confusing unless you know what you're looking for, especially since articles and pronouns have two main jobs. They tell us not only what the function is of the nouns, but also their gender. But that's a story for another day. If you're interested in learning more about cases, you should watch this video next. Also das war's dann für heute. Danke fürs Zuschauen. Auf Wiedersehen und Tschüss.